Dear children, let us learn about the next type of biogeochemical cycle, that is nitrogen cycle. We have learned nitrogen cycle in class 8, so let us have a quick revision. The sequence of events through which the nitrogen passes from the atmosphere to the soil and organisms and then back it reaches the atmosphere, thus completing the cycle, is called as nitrogen cycle. The amount of nitrogen in the atmosphere is 78%, and this amount is maintained by the nitrogen cycle, which we are going to learn. First, let us learn how nitrogen is important, or why nitrogen is important to all living organisms. Nitrogen is an essential constituent of many biomolecules that make up a body, like proteins, nucleic acids like DNA and RNA, vitamins, chlorophyll molecules in the plants which help in photosynthesis. All these biomolecules require nitrogen to make up their structure. And plants and animals, they cannot utilize, even though the atmosphere is having 78% of nitrogen, they are not able to utilize this nitrogen directly, and they have the or they require the help of certain nitrogen fixers, their organisms which absorb or which fix the atmospheric nitrogen and convert them into usable forms to all the organisms. So this process is called as nitrogen fixation. That is the first main process. The first main step in nitrogen cycle is nitrogen fixation, which is done by nitrogen fixers. There are two types of nitrogen fixers. Either they can be free living or they can be in symbiotic association. Symbiotic association means in which two organisms are living in close relationship with each other, helping each other. So the symbiotic nitrogen fixation is very familiar to you. We know the bacteria. What is it called as? Yes, you know it. It is nothing but the rhizobium. And this rhizobium bacterium is living in symbiotic association with which plant? With the leguminous plants. And in which part? In the root system, and it forms root nodules. Okay, root nodules are formed by these nitrogen fixing bacteria, that is rhizobium. And these bacteria, they absorb the atmospheric nitrogen and convert it into ammonia, and this ammonia is utilized or it is absorbed by the plants. So nitrogen fixing bacteria, which are symbiotic, and also the free living nitrogen fixing bacteria, they are not living in any symbiotic association, and they convert the atmospheric nitrogen into ammonia, and almost 90% of the atmospheric nitrogen is fixed by the nitrogen fixers by the process called as nitrogen fixation. In addition to this biological nitrogen fixation by living organisms, lightning also plays a very important role in nitrogen fixation. When lightning occurs, the high temperature and pressure convert nitrogen and water into nitrates and nitrites, which are oxides of nitrogen, usable forms of nitrogen. These nitrates and nitrites, they also have the ability to dissolve in water and reach the aquatic ecosystem so that it can be utilized by the aquatic plants and animals. The atmospheric nitrogen is fixed by the process called as nitrogen fixation, which can be with the help of organisms and also by lightning, and it can also take place by industrial fixation, which is done by humans, in which atmospheric nitrogen along with hydrogen is converted into ammonia. Okay, so there are three types of nitrogen fixation: biological, physical, that is by lightning, and also industrial by humans. And this nitrogen fixation, which is done with the help of lightning or with the help of organisms, it reaches the soil in the form of ammonia. And this ammonia is absorbed by the green plants and it forms the protoplasm. That means it is a part of the plant body. And when it's consumed by animals, it enters into the animal plant body. And when both plants and animals die, what happens? This nitrogen which is present inside their body has to be released back. And this process is called as ammonification, which is a second main step in nitrogen fixation. Ammonification is the process in which the nitrogen which is present in the plants and animals, it is converted into ammonia. it is converted into ammonia by bacteria, that is decomposers, and it is releasing the ammonia into the soil, and this process is called as ammonification. And the third step in nitrogen cycle is this ammonia. It has to be converted into nitrites and nitrates. It has to be converted into nitrites and nitrates. And this process is called as nitrification. So nitrification is also done by microorganisms, and these nitrites and nitrates, when it is converted into nitrates, it is absorbed by the plants from the soil. So all this is a cyclic process. And the last process is this nitrogen which is present in the soil has to reach back the atmosphere, and this is done by certain bacteria which convert the nitrates into atmospheric nitrogen, and this process is called as denitrification, which is done by denitrifying bacteria. So the 4 steps involved in nitrogen cycle are nitrogen fixation, yes, then ammonification, the nitrification and denitrification. The amount of nitrogen is kept constant in the atmosphere with the help of nitrogen cycle. Next, let us learn about the oxygen cycle. The oxygen cycle is a very important biogeochemical cycle which is necessary for the existence of life. The oxygen cycle is a sequence of events in which the oxygen passes from the atmosphere to the lithosphere and also to the different living organisms and reaches back to the atmosphere. So it is a sequence of events by which oxygen passes through different spheres, namely the atmosphere, the lithosphere and the biosphere. This oxygen is very important for our existence of life, isn't it? 21% of the atmosphere is composed of oxygen. And this oxygen is also seen in the form of oxides, carbon dioxide, okay, nitrogen oxide, sulfur oxides. All these oxides are formed with the help of oxygen. So oxygen is utilized from the atmosphere for respiration. For respiration, for the breathing process, for the inhalation, we take in oxygen. So the oxygen from the atmosphere is utilized for respiration, and after respiration, what do we release out? We release out carbon dioxide, and this carbon dioxide is utilized by the green plants for the process called as photosynthesis, by which they release back oxygen into the atmosphere, and the product of photosynthesis nothing but the glucose molecule, and its formula is C6H12O6. Again, in that glucose also we can find oxygen. Oxygen is also utilized for combustion processes, for combustion of fossil fuels. For combustion processes, oxygen is very useful, and also for decomposition processes also, oxygen is very important. So the cyclic events by which the oxygen moves from the atmosphere and to the lithosphere and also among the different organisms is called as oxygen cycle, and it is also a very essential component to make the different biomolecules like carbohydrates that we had I had just told you, C6H12O6, that is glucose, is carbohydrates, fats, proteins. All these biomolecules require oxygen. So dear children, in this module we learnt about 2 biogeochemical cycles which is needed for the existence of life, namely the nitrogen cycle and the oxygen cycle. Thank you.